Ballad number 1 of More Bab Ballads. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Graham Redman. More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. Ballad number 1, Mr. William. Oh, listen to the tale of Mr. William, if you please, whom naughty, naughty judges sent away beyond the seas. He forged a party's will, which caused anxiety and strife, resulting in his getting penal servitude for life. He was a kindly, goodly man, and naturally prone, instead of taking others' gold, to give away his own. But he had heard of vice, and longed for only once to strike, to plan one little wickedness, to see what it was like. He argued with himself, and said, "A spotless man am I. I can't be more respectable, however hard I try. For 36 years I've always been as good as gold, and now for half an hour I'll plan infamy untold. A baby who is wicked at the early age of 1, and then reforms, and dies at 36 a spotless son, is never, never saddled with his babyhood's defect, but earns from worthy men consideration and respect. So one who never revelled in discreditable tricks until he reached the comfortable age of 36, may then for half an hour perpetrate a deed of shame, without incurring permanent disgrace, or even blame. That babies don't commit such crimes as forgery is true, but little sins develop if you leave 'em to accrue, and he who shuns all vices as successive seasons roll should reap at length the benefit of so much self-control. The common sin of babyhood, objecting to be dressed, if you leave it to accumulate at compound interest, for anything you know may represent, if you're alive, a burglary or murder at the age of 35. Still, I wouldn't take advantage of this fact, but be content with some pardonable folly. It's a mere experiment. The greater the temptation to go wrong, the less the sin. So with something that's particularly tempting I'll begin. I would not steal a penny, for my income's very fair. I do not want a penny, I have pennies and to spare, and if I stole a penny from a money bag or till, the sin would be enormous, the temptation being nil. But if I broke asunder all such pettifogging bounds, and forged a party's will for, say, £500,000, with such an irresistible temptation to a haul, of course the sin must be infinitesimally small. There's Wilson, who is dying. He has wealth from stock and rent. If I divert his riches from their natural descent, I'm placed in a position to indulge each little whim. So he diverted them, and they, in turn, diverted him. Unfortunately, though, by some unpardonable flaw, temptation isn't recognized by Britain's common law. Men found him out by some peculiarity of touch, and William got a lifer, which annoyed him very much. For he never reconciled himself to life in jail. He fretted and he pined, and grew dispirited and pale. He was numbered like a cabman, too, which told upon him so that his spirits, once so buoyant, grew uncomfortably low. And sympathetic jailers would remark, "It's very true, he ain't been brought up common like the likes of me and you." So they took him into hospital and gave him mutton chops, and chocolate and arrowroot, and buns and malt and hops. Kind clergymen, besides, grew interested in his fate, affected by the details of his pitiable state. They waited on the secretary somewhere in Whitehall, who said he would receive them any day they liked to call. Consider, sir, the hardship of this interesting case. A prison life brings with it something very like disgrace. It's telling on young William, who's reduced to skin and bone. Remember, he's a gentleman with money of his own. He had an ample income, and of course he stands in need of sherry with his dinner, and his customary weed. No delicacies now can pass his gentlemanly lips. He misses his sea-bathing and his continental trips. He says the other prisoners are commonplace and rude. He says he cannot relish uncongenial prison food. When quite a boy they taught him to distinguish good from bad, and other educational advantages he's had. A burglar or garrotter, or indeed a common thief, is very glad to batten on potatoes and on beef, or anything, in short, that prison kitchens can afford, a cut above the diet in a common workhouse ward. But beef and mutton broth don't seem to suit our William's whim, a boon to other prisoners, a punishment to him. It never was intended that the discipline of jail should dash a convict's spirits, sir, or make him thin or pale. "Good gracious me!" that sympathetic secretary cried. "Suppose in prison fetters Mr. William should have died? Dear me, of course, imprisonment for life his sentence saith. I'm very glad you mentioned it. It might have been for death. Release him with a ticket. He'll be better then, no doubt. And tell him I apologize." So Mr. William's out. I hope he will be careful in his manuscripts, I'm sure, and not begin experimentalizing any more. End of Ballad number 1, Mr. William, of More Bab Ballads, by W.S. Gilbert. Ballad number 2 of More Bab Ballads, by W.S. Gilbert, read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. The Bumboat Woman's Story. I'm old, my dears, and shrivelled with age and work and grief. My eyes are gone, and my teeth have been drawn by Time, the thief. For terrible sights I've seen, and dangers great I've run. I'm nearly 70 now, and my work is almost done. Ah, I've been young in my time, and I've played the deuce with men. I'm speaking of 10 years past, I was barely 60 then. My cheeks were mellow and soft, and my eyes were large and sweet. Poll Pineapple's eyes were the standing toast of the Royal Fleet. A bumboat woman was I, and I faithfully served the ships, with apples and cakes and fowls, and beer and halfpenny dips, and beef for the generous mess where the officers dine at nights, and fine fresh peppermint drops for the rollicking midshipmites. Of all the kind commanders who anchored in Portsmouth Bay, by far the sweetest of all was kind Lieutenant Belay. Lieutenant Belay commanded the gunboat Hot Cross Bun. She was 37 feet in length, and she carried a gun. With a laudable view of enhancing his country's naval pride, when people inquired her size, Lieutenant Belay replied, "Oh, my ship is the first of the 171s," which meant her tonnage, but people imagined it meant her guns. Whenever I went on board, he would beckon me down below. "Come down, little buttercup, come," for he loved to call me so. And he'd tell of the fights at sea in which he'd taken a part, and so Lieutenant Belay won poor Poll Pineapple's heart. But at length his orders came, and he said one day, said he, I'm ordered to sail with the Hot Cross Bun to the German Sea." And the Portsmouth maidens wept when they learnt the evil day, for every Portsmouth maid loved good Lieutenant Belay. And I went to a back street, with plenty of cheap shops, and I bought an oilskin hat and a second-hand suit of slops. And I went to Lieutenant Belay, and he never suspected me, and I entered myself as a chap as wanted to go to sea. We sailed that afternoon at the mystic hour of 1. Remarkably nice young men were the crew of the Hot Cross Bun. I'm sorry to say that I've heard that sailors sometimes swear, but I never yet heard a bun say anything wrong, I declare. When Jack tars meet, they meet with a "Messmate, ho! What cheer?" But here on the Hot Cross Bun it was "How do you do, my dear?" When Jack tars growl, I believe they growl with a big D. But the strongest oath of the Hot Cross Buns was a mild "Dear me." Yet though they were all well bred, you could scarcely call them slick. Whenever a sea was on, they were all extremely sick, and whenever the weather was calm, and the wind was light and fair, they spent more time than a sailor should on his back hair. They certainly shivered and shook when ordered aloft to run, and they screamed when Lieutenant Belay discharged his only gun. And as he was proud of his gun, such pride is hardly wrong, the lieutenant was blazing away at intervals all day long. They all agreed very well, though at times you heard it said that Bill had a way of his own of making his lips look red, that Joe looked quite his age, or somebody might declare that Barnacle's long pigtail was never his own hair. Belay would admit that his men were of no great use to him, but then, he would say, there is little to do on a gunboat trim. I can hand and reef and steer, and fire my big gun too, and it is such a treat to sail with a gentle, well-bred crew. I saw him every day, how the happy moments sped. Reef topsails, make all taut, there's dirty weather ahead. I do not mean that tempests threatened the Hot Cross Bun. In that case I don't know whatever we should have done. After a fortnight's cruise we put into port one day, and off on leave for a week went kind Lieutenant Belay. And after a long week had passed, and it seemed like a life, Lieutenant Belay returned to his ship with a fair young wife. He up and he says he, "O crew of the Hot Cross Bun, here is the wife of my heart, for the Church has made us one." And as he uttered the word, the crew went out of their wits, and all fell down in so many separate fainting fits. And then their hair came down, or off, as the case might be, and lo, the rest of the crew were simple girls like me, who all had fled from their homes in a sailor's blue array to follow the shifting fate of kind Lieutenant Belay. It's strange to think that I should ever have loved young men, but I'm speaking of 10 years past. I was barely 60 then, and now my cheeks are furrowed with grief and age, I trow, and poor Poll Pineapple's eyes have lost their lustre now. End of Ballad number 2, The Bumboat Woman's Story, of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 3 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert, read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. The Two Ogres. Good children, list, if you're inclined. and wicked children too, this pretty ballad is designed especially for you. 2 ogres dwelt in Wickham Wold, each traits distinctive had. The younger was as good as gold, the elder was as bad. A wicked, disobedient son was James McAlpine, and, a contrast to the elder one, good apple-body Bland. McAlpine, brutes like him are few, in greediness delights, a melancholy victim to unchastened appetites. Good well-bred children every day he ravenously ate. All boys were fish who found their way into McAlpine's net. Boys whose good breeding is innate, whose sums are always right, and boys who don't expostulate when sent to bed at night, and kindly boys who never search the nests of birds of song, and serious boys for whom, in church, no sermon is too long. Contrast with James's greedy haste and comprehensive hand the nice discriminating taste of apple-body Bland. Bland only eats bad boys, who swear, who can behave, but don't, disgraceful lads who say, don't care, and shan't, and can't, and won't, who wet their shoes and learn to box, and say what isn't true, who bite their nails and jam their frocks, and make long noses too, who kick a nurse's aged shin, and sit in sulky mopes, and boys who twirl poor kittens in distracting zoetropes. But James, when he was quite a youth, had often been to school, and though so bad, to tell the truth, he wasn't quite a fool. At logic few with him could vie, to his peculiar sect he could propose a fallacy with singular effect. So when his mentors said, "Expound, why eat good children, why?" upon his mentors he would round with this absurd reply: "I have been taught to love the good, the pure, the unalloyed, and wicked boys I've understood I always should avoid. Why do I eat good children? Why? Because I love them so." But this was empty sophistry, as your papa can show. Now, though the learning of his friends was truly not immense, they had a way of fitting ends by rule of common sense. "Away, away!" his mentors cried, "thou uncongenial pest! A quirk's a thing we can't abide, a quibble we detest. A fallacy in your reply our intellect descries, although we don't pretend to spy exactly where it lies. In misery and penal woes must end a glutton's joys, and learn how ogres punish those who dare to eat good boys. Secured by fetter, cramp, and chain, and gagged securely, so, you shall be placed in Drury Lane, where only good lads go. Surrounded there by virtuous boys, you'll suffer torture worse than that which constantly annoys disgraceful Tantalus. If you would learn the woes that vex poor Tantalus down there, pray borrow of papa an expurgated Lempriere. But as for Bland, who, as it seems, eats only naughty boys, we've planned a recompense that teems with gastronomic joys. Where wicked youths in crowds are stowed, he shall unquestioned rule, and have the run of Hackney Road Reformatory School. End of Ballad number 3, The 2 Ogres, of More Bab Ballads, by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 4 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert, read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. Little Oliver. Earl Joyce, he was a kind old party, whom nothing ever could put out. Though 82, he still was hearty, excepting as regarded gout. He had one unexampled daughter, the Lady Minnehaha Joyce, fair Minnehaha, laughing water, so called from her melodious voice. By nature planned for lover capture, her beauty every heart assailed. The good old nobleman with rapture observed how widely she prevailed. Aloof from all the lordly flockings of titled swells who worshipped her, there stood, in pumps and cotton stockings, one humble lover, Oliver. He was no peer by fortune petted, his name recalled no bygone age, he was no lordling coroneted. Alas, he was a simple page. With vain appeals he never bored her, but stood in silent sorrow by. He knew how fondly he adored her, and knew, alas, how hopelessly. Well grounded by a village tutor in languages alive and past, he'd say unto himself, "Knee suitor, oh, do not go beyond your last." But though his name could boast no handle, he could not every hope resign. As moths will hover round a candle, so hovered he about her shrine. The brilliant candle dazed the moth well. One day she sang to her papa the air that Marie sings with Bothwell in Niedermeyer's opera. Therein a stable boy, it's stated, devoutly loved a noble dame, who ardently reciprocated his rather injudicious flame. And then, before the piano closing, he listened coyly at the door, she sang a song of her composing. I give one verse from half a score. Why, pretty page, art ever sighing? Is sorrow in thy heartlet lying? Come, set a-ringing, thy laugh entrancing, and ever singing, and ever dancing, ever singing tra-la-la, ever dancing tra-la-la, ever singing, ever dancing, ever singing tra-la-la. He skipped for joy like little muttons, he danced like Esmeralda's kid. She did not mean a boy in buttons, although he fancied that she did. Poor lad, convinced he thus would win her, he wore out many pairs of soles. He danced when taking down the dinner, he danced when bringing up the coals. He danced and sang, however laden, with his incessant tra-la-la, which much surprised the noble maiden, and puzzled even her papa. He nourished now his flame and fanned it, he even danced at work below. The upper servants wouldn't stand it, and Bowles the butler told him so. At length, on impulse acting blindly, his love he laid completely bare. The gentle Earl received him kindly, and told the lad to take a chair. "Oh, sir," the suitor uttered sadly, "don't give your indignation vent. I fear you think I'm acting madly. Perhaps you think me insolent." The kindly Earl repelled the notion. His noble bosom heaved a sigh. His fingers trembled with emotion, a tear stood in his mild blue eye. For, oh, the scene recalled too plainly the half-forgotten time when he, a boy of 9, had worshipped vainly a governess of 43. "My boy," he said in tone consoling, "give up this idle fancy, do. The song you heard my daughter trolling did not indeed refer to you. I feel for you, poor boy, acutely. I would not wish to give you pain. Your pangs I estimate minutely. I, too, have loved, and loved in vain. But still your humble rank and station for Minnie surely are not meet." He said much more in conversation, which it were needless to repeat. Now I'm prepared to bet a guinea, were this a mere dramatic case, the page would have eloped with Minnie. But no, he only left his place. The simple truth is my detective, with me sensation can't abide. The likely beats the mere effective, and nature is my only guide. End of Ballad number 4, Little Oliver, of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 5 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert, read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. Pasha Bailey Ben. A proud Pasha was Bailey Ben. His wives were 3, his tails were 10. His form was dignified but stout. Men called him Little Roundabout. His importance. Pale pilgrims came from o'er the sea to wait on Pasha Bailey B, all bearing presents in a crowd, for B was poor as well as proud. His presents. They brought him onions strung on ropes, and cold boiled beef, and telescopes, and balls of string, and shrimps, and guns, and chops, and tacks, and hats, and buns. More of them. They brought him white kid gloves, and pails, and candlesticks, and potted quails, and capstan bars, and scales and weights, and ornaments for empty grates. Why I mention these? My tale is not of these, oh no! I only mention them to show the divers gifts that divers men brought o'er the sea to Bailey Ben. His confidant. A confidant had Bailey B, a gay Mongolian dog was he. I am not good at Turkish names, and so I call him Simple James. His confidant's countenance. A dreadful legend you might trace in Simple James's honest face, for there you read in nature's print, a scoundrel of the deepest tint. His character. A deed of blood or fire or flames was meat and drink to Simple James. To hide his guilt he did not plan, but owned himself a bad young man. The author to his reader. And why on earth good Bailey Ben, the wisest, noblest, best of men, made Simple James his right-hand man, is quite beyond my mental span. The same continued. But there, enough of gruesome deeds, my heart in thinking of them bleeds, and so let Simple James take wing. 'Tis not of him I'm going to sing. The Pasha's Clerk. Good Pasha Bailey kept a clerk, for Bailey only made his mark. His name was Matthew Wickham Coo, a man of nearly 42. His accomplishments. No person that I ever knew could yodel half as well as Coo, and Highlanders exclaimed "Eh, weel," when Coo began to dance a reel. His kindness to the Pasha's wives. He used to dance and sing and play in such an unaffected way, he cheered the unexciting lives of Pasha Bailey's lovely wives. The author to his reader. But why should I encumber you with histories of Matthew Coo? Let Matthew Coo at once take wing. 'Tis not of Coo I'm going to sing. The author's muse. Let me recall my wandering muse. She shall be steady if I choose. She roves instead of helping me to tell the deeds of Bailey B. The Pasha's visitor. One morning knocked at 8:30 a tall Red Indian at his gate. In Turkey, as you're p'raps aware, Red Indians are extremely rare. The visitor's outfit. Moccasins decked his graceful legs, his eyes were black and round as eggs, and on his neck, instead of beads, hung several catawampus seeds. What the visitor said. "Ho, ho," he said, "thou pale-faced one, poor offspring of an eastern sun, you've never seen the red man skip upon the banks of Mississippi." The author's moderation. To say that Bailey oped his eyes would feebly paint his great surprise. To say it almost made him die would be to paint it much too high. The author to his reader. But why should I ransack my head to tell you all that Indian said? We'll let the Indian man take wing, 'tis not of him I'm going to sing. The reader to the author. Come, come, I say, that's quite enough of this absurd, disjointed stuff. Now let's get on to that affair about Lieutenant Colonel Flare. End of Ballad number 5, Pasha Bailey Ben, of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 6 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert, read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. Lieutenant Colonel Flare. The earth has armies plenty, and semi-warlike bands. I dare say there are 20 in European lands. But oh, in no direction you'd find one to compare, in brotherly affection, with that of Colonel Flare. His soldiers might be rated as military pearls, as unsophisticated as pretty little girls. They never smoked or ratted, or talked of Sioux or Poles. The sergeant major tatted, the others nursed their dolls. He spent his days in teaching these truly solemn facts. There's little use in preaching or circulating tracts. The vainest plan invented for stifling other creeds, unless it's supplemented with charitable deeds. He taught his soldiers kindly to give at hunger's call. Oh, better far give blindly than never give at all. Though sympathy be kindled by imposition's game, oh, better far be swindled than smother up its flame. His means were far from ample, for pleasure or for dress. Yet note this bright example of single-heartedness. Though ranking as a colonel, his pay was but a groat, while their reward diurnal was each a £5 note. Moreover, this evinces his kindness, you'll allow, he fed them all like princes, and lived himself on cow. He set them all regaling on curious wines and deer, while he would sit pale aling, or quaffing ginger beer. Then at his instigation, a pretty fancy this, their daily pay and ration he'd take in change for his. They brought it to him weekly, and he, without a groan, would take it from them meekly, and give them all his own. Though not exactly knighted, as knights of course should be, yet no one so delighted in harmless chivalry. If peasant girl or lady beneath misfortune sank, whate'er distinctions made he, they were not those of rank. No maiden young and comely who wanted good advice, however poor or homely, need ask him for it twice. He'd wipe away the blindness that comes of teary dew. His sympathetic kindness no sort of limit knew. He always hated dealing with men who schemed or planned. A person harsh, unfeeling, the colonel could not stand. He hated cold, suspecting official men in blue, who pass their lives detecting the crimes that others do. For men who'd shoot a sparrow or immolate a worm beneath a farmer's harrow, he could not find a term. Humanely, aye, and knightly, he dealt with such an one. He took and tied him tightly, and blew him from a gun. The earth has armies plenty, and semi-warlike bands. I'm certain there are 20 in European lands. But oh, in no direction you'd find one to compare, in brotherly affection, with that of Colonel Flare. End of Ballad number 6, Lieutenant Colonel Flare, of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 7 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert, read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. Lost Mr. Blake. Mr. Blake was a regular out-and-out hardened sinner, who was quite out of the pale of Christianity, so to speak. He was in the habit of smoking a long pipe and drinking a glass of grog on a Sunday after dinner, and seldom thought of going to church more than twice, or, if Good Friday or Christmas Day happened to come in it, 3 times a week. He was quite indifferent as to the particular kinds of dresses that the clergyman wore at church where he used to go to pray, and whatever he did in the way of relieving a chap's distresses, he always did in a nasty, sneaking, underhanded, hole-and-corner sort of way. I have known him indulge in profane, ungentlemanly emphatics, when the Protestant Church has been divided on the subject of the proper width of a chasuble hem. I have even known him to sneer at albs, and as for dalmatics, words can't convey an idea of the contempt he expressed for them. He didn't believe in persons who, not being well off themselves, are obliged to confine their charitable exertions to collecting money from wealthier people, and looked upon individuals of the former class as ecclesiastical hawks. He used to say that he would no more think of interfering with his priest's robes than with his church or his steeple, and that he did not consider his soul imperilled because somebody, over whom he had no influence whatever, chose to dress himself up like an exaggerated Guy Fawkes. This shocking old vagabond was so unutterably shameless that he actually went a-courting a very respectable and pious middle-aged sister by the name of Biggs. She was a rather attractive widow, whose life as such had always been particularly blameless. Her first husband had left her a secure but moderate competence, owing to some fortunate speculations in the matter of figs. She was an excellent person in every way, and won the respect even of Mrs. Grundy. She was a good housewife, too, and wouldn't have wasted a penny if she had owned the Koh-i-Noor. She was just as strict as he was lax in her observance of Sunday, and being a good economist, and charitable besides, she took all the bones and cold potatoes and broken pie crusts and candle ends, when she had quite done with them, and made them into an excellent soup for the deserving poor. I am sorry to say that she rather took to Blake, that outcast of society, and when respectable brothers who were fond of her began to look dubious and to cough, she would say, "Oh, my friends, it's because I hope to bring this poor benighted soul back to virtue and propriety." And besides, the poor benighted soul, with all his faults, was uncommonly well off. And when Mr. Blake's dissipated friends called his attention to the frown or the pout of her, whenever he did anything which appeared to her to savour of an unmentionable place, he would say that she would be a very decent old girl when all that nonsense was knocked out of her, and his method of knocking it out of her is one that covered him with disgrace. She was fond of going to church services 4 times every Sunday, and 4 or 5 times in the week, and never seemed to pall of them. So he hunted out all the churches within a convenient distance that had services at different hours, so to speak. And when he had married her, he positively insisted upon their going to all of them. So they contrived to do about 12 churches every Sunday, and if they had luck, from 22 to 23 in the course of the week. She was fond of dropping his sovereigns ostentatiously into the plate, and she liked to see them stand out rather conspicuously against the commonplace half-crowns and shillings. So he took her to all the charity sermons, and if by any extraordinary chance there wasn't a charity sermon anywhere, he would drop a couple of sovereigns, one for him and one for her, into the poor box at the door. And as he always deducted the sums thus given in charity from the housekeeping money, and the money he allowed her for her bonnets and frillings, she soon began to find that even charity, if you allow it to interfere with your personal luxuries, becomes an intolerable bore. On Sundays she was always melancholy, and anything but good society, for that day in her household was a day of sighings and sobbings, and wringing of hands and shaking of heads. She wouldn't hear of a button being sewn on a glove, because it was a work neither of necessity nor of piety, and strictly prohibited her servants from amusing themselves, or indeed doing anything at all except dusting the drawing-rooms, cleaning the boots and shoes, cooking the parlour dinner, waiting generally on the family, and making the beds. But Blake even went further than that, and said that people should do their own works of necessity, and not delegate them to persons in a menial situation. So he wouldn't allow his servants to do so much as even answer a bell. Here he is making his wife carry up the water for her bath to the second floor, much against her inclination, and why in the world the gentleman who illustrates these ballads has put him in a cocked hat is more than I can tell. After about 3 months of this sort of thing, taking the smooth with the rough of it, blacking her own boots and peeling her own potatoes was not her notion of connubial bliss, Mrs. Blake began to find that she had pretty nearly had enough of it, and came in course of time to think that Blake's own original line of conduct wasn't so much amiss. And now that wicked person, that detestable sinner, Belial Blake, his friends and well-wishers call him for his atrocities, and his poor deluded victim, whom all her Christian brothers dislike and pity so, go to the parish church only on Sunday morning and afternoon, and occasionally on a weekday, and spend their evenings in connubial fondlings and affectionate reciprocities. And I should like to know where in the world, or rather out of it, they expect to go. End of Ballad number 7, Lost Mr. Blake, of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 8 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. Read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. The Baby's Vengeance. Weary at heart and extremely ill was Paley Volare of Bromptonville, in a dirty lodging with fever down, close to the Polygon, Somers Town. Paley Volare was an only son, for why? His mother had had but one, and Paley inherited gold and grounds worth several £100,000. But he, like many a rich young man, through this magnificent fortune ran, and nothing was left for his daily needs but duplicate copies of mortgage deeds. Shabby and sorry and sorely sick, he slept, and dreamt that the clock's tick-tick was one of the fates with a long sharp knife, snicking off bits of his shortened life. He woke and counted the pips on the walls, the outdoor passengers' loud footfalls, and reckoned all over, and reckoned again, the little white tufts on his counterpane. A medical man to his bedside came, I can't remember that doctor's name, and said, "You'll die in a very short while if you don't set sail for Madeira's isle." "Go to Madeira? Goodness me, I haven't the money to pay your fee." "Then, Paley Volare," said the leech, "goodbye. I'll come no more, for you're sure to die." He sighed and he groaned and smote his breast. "Oh, send," said he, "for Frederick West, ere senses fade or my eyes grow dim. I've a terrible tale to whisper him." Poor was Frederick's lot in life, a dustman he, with a fair young wife, a worthy man with a hard-earned store, 170 pounds or more. Frederick came, and he said, "Maybe you'll say what you happened to want with me." "Wronged boy," said Paley Volare, "I will, but don't you fidget yourself, sit still." The Terrible Tale. 'Tis now some 37 years ago since first began the plot that I'm revealing. A fine young woman, whom you ought to know, lived with her husband down in Drum Lane, Ealing, herself by means of mangling reimbursing, and now and then, at intervals, wet nursing. 2 little babes dwelt in their humble cot. One was her own, the other only lent to her. Her own she slighted. Tempted by a lot of gold and silver regularly sent to her, she ministered unto the little other in the capacity of foster mother. I was her own. Oh, how I lay and sobbed in my poor cradle, deeply, deeply cursing the rich man's pampered bantling, who had robbed my only birthright, an attentive nursing. Sometimes, in hatred of my foster brother, I gnashed my gums, which terrified my mother. One day, it was quite early in the week, I, in my cradle having placed the bantling, crept into his. He had not learnt to speak, but I could see his face with anger mantling. It was imprudent, well, disgraceful maybe, for oh, I was a bad, black-hearted baby. So great a luxury was food, I think no wickedness, but I was game to try for it. Now, if I wanted anything to drink at any time, I only had to cry for it. Once, if I dared to weep, the bottle lacking, my blubbering involved a serious smacking. We grew up in the usual way, my friend, my foster brother, daily growing thinner, while gradually I began to mend, and thrived amazingly on double dinner. And everyone, besides my foster mother, believed that either of us was the other. I came into his wealth, I bore his name, I bear it still, his property I squandered. I mortgaged everything, and now, oh shame, into a Somers Town shakedown I've wandered. I am no Paley, no Volare, it's true, my boy. The only rightful Paley V is you, my boy. And all I have is yours, and yours is mine. I still may place you in your true position. Give me the pounds you've saved, and I'll resign my noble name, my rank, and my condition. So far my wickedness in falsely owning your vasty wealth, I am at last atoning." Frederick he was a simple soul. He pulled from his pocket a bulky roll, and gave to Paley his hard-earned store, 170 pounds or more. Paley Volare, with many a groan, gave Frederick all that he called his own: 2 shirts and a sock, and a vest of jean, a Wellington boot and a bamboo cane. And Fred, entitled to all things there, he took the fever from Mr. Volare, which killed poor Frederick West. Meanwhile Volare sailed off to Madeira's isle. End of Ballad number 8, The Baby's Vengeance, of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 9 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. Read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. The Captain and the Mermaids. I sing a legend of the sea, so hard a port upon your lee, a ship on starboard tack, She's bound upon a private cruise. This is the kind of spice I use to give a salt sea smack. Behold, on every afternoon, save in a gale or strong monsoon, great Captain Capel Cleggs, great morally, though rather short, sat at an open weather port, and aired his shapely legs. And mermaids hung around in flocks on cable chains and distant rocks to gaze upon those limbs, for legs like those of flesh and bone are things not generally known to any merman Tims. But mermen didn't seem to care much time, as far as I'm aware, with Cleggs's legs to spend, though mermaids swam around all day and gazed, exclaiming, "That's the way a gentleman should end!" A pair of legs with well-cut knees, and calves and ankles such as these, which we in rapture hail, are far more eloquent, it's clear, when clothed in silk and kerseymere, than any nasty tale. And Cleggs, a worthy, kind old boy, rejoiced to add to others' joy, and, when the day was dry, because it pleased the lookers-on, he sat from morn till night, though constitutionally shy. At first the mermen laughed, "Pooh, pooh!" But finally they jealous grew, and sounded loud recalls, but vainly. So these fishy males declared they too would clothe their tails in silken hose and smalls. They set to work, these watermen, and made their nether robes, but when they drew with dainty touch the kerseymere upon their tails, they found it scraped against their scales, and hurt them very much. The silk, besides, with which they chose to deck their tails by way of hose, they never thought of shoon, for such a use was much too thin. It tore against the caudal fin, and went in ladders soon. So they designed another plan. They sent their most seductive man this note to him to show: "Our monarch sends to Captain Cleggs his humble compliments, and begs he'll join him down below. We've pleasant homes below the sea. Besides, if Captain Cleggs should be, as our advices say, a judge of mermaids, he will find our lady fish of every kind inspection will repay." Good Capel sent a kind reply, for Capel thought he could descry an admirable plan to study all their ways and laws, but not their lady fish, because he was a married man. The merman sank, the captain too jumped overboard and dropped from view like stone from catapult, and when he reached the merman's lair he certainly was welcomed there, but ah, with what result! They didn't let him learn their law, or make a note of what he saw, or interesting mem. The lady fish he couldn't find, but that, of course, he didn't mind. He didn't come for them. For though when Captain Capel sank, the mermen, drawn in double rank, gave him a hearty hail, yet when secure of Captain Cleggs, they cut off both his lovely legs, and gave him such a tail. When Captain Cleggs returned aboard, his blithesome crew convulsive roared to see him altered so. The Admiralty did insist that he upon the half-pay list immediately should go. In vain declared the poor old salt, "It's my misfortune, not my fault," with tear and trembling lip. In vain poor Capel begged and begged. "A man must be completely legged who rules a British ship." So spake the stern First Lord aloud. He was a wag, though very proud, and much rejoiced to say, "You're only half a captain now, and so, my worthy friend, I vow you'll only get half pay." End of Ballad number 9, The Captain and the Mermaids, of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 10 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert, read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. Annie Prothero, A Legend of Stratford-le-Bow. Oh, listen to the tale of little Annie Prothero. She kept a small post office in the neighbourhood of Bow. She loved a skilled mechanic, who was famous in his day, a gentle executioner, whose name was Gilbert Clay. I think I hear you say, "A dreadful subject for your rhymes." Oh, reader, do not shrink, he didn't live in modern times. He lived so long ago, the sketch will show it at a glance, that all his actions glitter with the limelight of romance. In busy times he laboured at his gentle craft all day. No doubt you mean his Calcraft, you amusingly will say. But no, he didn't operate with common bits of string. He was a public headsman, which is quite another thing. And when his work was over, they would ramble o'er the lea, and sit beneath the frondage of an elderberry tree. And Annie's simple prattle entertained him on his walk, for public executions formed the subject of her talk. And sometimes he'd explain to her, which charmed her very much, how famous operators vary very much in touch. And then, perhaps, he'd show how he himself performed the trick, and illustrate his meaning with a poppy and a stick. Or, if it rained, the little maid would stop at home, and look at his favourable notices, all pasted in a book. And then her cheek would flush, her swimming eyes would dance with joy, in a glow of admiration at the prowess of her boy. One summer eve at supper-time, the gentle Gilbert said, as he helped his pretty Annie to a slice of collared head, "This reminds me, I must settle on the next ensuing day the hash of that unmitigated villain, Peter Grey." He saw his Annie tremble, and he saw his Annie start. Her changing colour trumpeted the flutter at her heart. Young Gilbert's manly bosom rose and sank with jealous fear, and he said, "Oh, gentle Annie, what's the meaning of this here?" And Annie answered, blushing in an interesting way, "You think, no doubt, I'm sighing for that felon, Peter Grey. That I was his young woman is unquestionably true, but not since I began a-keeping company with you." Then Gilbert, who was irritable, rose and loudly swore he'd know the reason why if she refused to tell him more. And she answered, all the woman in her flashing from her eyes, "You mustn't ask no questions, and you won't be told no lies. Few lovers have the privilege enjoyed, my dear, by you, of chopping off a rival's head, and quartering him too. Of vengeance, dear, to-morrow you will surely take your fill." And Gilbert ground his molars as he answered her, "I will." Young Gilbert rose from table with a stern, determined look, and, frowning, took an inexpensive hatchet from its hook. And Annie watched his movements with an interested air. For the morrow he was going to prepare. He chipped it with a hammer, and he chopped it with a bill. He poured sulphuric acid on the edge of it until this terrible avenger of the majesty of law was far less like a hatchet than a dissipated saw. And Annie said, "Oh, Gilbert, dear, I do not understand why ever you are injuring that hatchet in your hand." He said, "It is intended for to lacerate and flay the neck of that unmitigated villain, Peter Grey." "Now, Gilbert," Annie answered, "wicked headsman, just beware. I won't have Peter tortured with that horrible affair. If you appear with that, you may depend you'll rue the day." But Gilbert said, "Oh, shall I?" which was just his nasty way. He saw a look of anger from her eyes distinctly dart, for Annie was a woman, and had pity in her heart. She wished him a good evening. He answered with a glare. She only said, "Remember, for your Annie will be there." The morrow Gilbert boldly on the scaffold took his stand, with a visor on his face, and with a hatchet in his hand. And all the people noticed that the engine of the law was far less like a hatchet than a dissipated saw. The felon very coolly loosed his collar and his stock, and placed his wicked head upon the handy little block. The hatchet was uplifted for to settle Peter Grey, when Gilbert plainly heard a woman's voice exclaiming, "Stay!" 'Twas Annie, gentle Annie, as you'll easily believe. "Oh, Gilbert, you must spare him, for I bring him a reprieve. It came from our Home Secretary many weeks ago, and passed through that post office which I used to keep at Bow. I loved you madly, and you know it, Gilbert Clay. And as I'd quite surrendered all idea of Peter Grey, I quietly suppressed it, as you'll clearly understand, for I thought it might be awkward if he came and claimed my hand. In anger at my secret, which I could not tell before, to lacerate poor Peter Grey vindictively you swore. I told you if you used that blunted axe you'd rue the day, and so you will, young Gilbert, for I'll marry Peter Grey." And so she did. End of Ballad number 10, Annie Protheroe, A Legend of Stratford-le-Bow, of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 11 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. Read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. An Unfortunate Likeness. I've painted Shakespeare all my life, an infant, even then at play, a boy, with stage ambition rife, then married to Anne Hathaway. The Bard's first ticket night, or Ben, his first appearance on the stage, his call before the curtain, then rejoicings when he came of age. The Bard play-writing in his room, the Bard a humble lawyer's clerk, the Bard a lawyer, parson, groom, the Bard deer-stealing after dark, the Bard a tradesman and a Jew, the Bard a botanist, a beak, the Bard a skilled musician too, a sheriff and a surgeon eke. Yet critics say, a friendly stock, that though it's evident I try, yet even I can barely mock the glimmer of his wondrous eye. One morning as a work I framed, there passed a person walking hard. "My gracious goodness!" I exclaimed, "how very like my dear old Bard! Oh, what a model he would make!" I rushed outside, impulsive me. "Forgive the liberty I take, but you're so very—" "Stop," said he. "You needn't waste your breath or time. I know what you are going to say, that you're an artist, and that I'm remarkably like Shakespeare, eh? You wish that I would sit to you." I clasped him madly round the waist, and breathlessly replied, "I do." "All right," said he, "but please make haste." I led him by his hallowed sleeve, and worked away at him apace. I painted him till dewy eve, there never was a nobler face. "O sir," I said, "a fortune grand is yours, by dint of merest chance, to sport his brow at second hand, to wear his cast-off countenance, to rub his eyes whene'er they ache, to wear his baldness ere you're old, to clean his teeth when you awake, to blow his nose when you've a cold. His eyeballs glistened in his eyes. I sat and watched and smoked my pipe. 'Bravo!' I said. 'I recognize the frenzy of your prototype.' His scanty hair he wildly tore. 'That's right,' said I, 'it shows your breed.' He danced, he stamped, he wildly swore. 'Bless me, that's very fine indeed.' 'Sir,' said the grand Shakespearean boy, continuing to blaze away, 'you think my face a source of joy. That shows you know not what you say. Forgive these yells and cellar flaps, I'm always thrown in some such state when on his face well-meaning chaps this wretched man congratulate. For oh, this face, this pointed chin, this nose, this brow, these eyeballs too, have always been the origin of all the woes I ever knew. If to the play my way I find, to see a grand Shakespearean piece, I have no rest, no ease of mind, until the author's puppets cease. Men nudge each other, thus, and say, 'This certainly is Shakespeare's son,' and merry wags, of course in play, cry 'Author!' when the piece is done. In church the people stare at me, their soul the sermon never binds. I catch them looking round to see, and thoughts of Shakespeare fill their minds. And sculptors, fraught with cunning wile, who find it difficult to crown a bust with Brown's insipid smile, or Tomkins's unmannered frown, yet boldly make my face their own when, oh presumption, they require to animate a paving stone with Shakespeare's intellectual fire. At parties, where young ladies gaze, and I attempt to speak my joy, 'Hush, pray,' some lovely creature says, 'the fond illusion don't destroy.' Whene'er I speak, my soul is wrung with these or some such whisperings. 'Tis pity that a Shakespeare's tongue should say such un-Shakespearean things. I should not thus be criticised had I a face of common wont. Don't envy me, now be advised. And, now I think of it, I don't. End of Ballad number 11, an unfortunate likeness of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain. Ballad number 12 of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert, read for LibriVox.org by Graham Redman. Gregory Parable, LL.D. A leafy cot, where no dry rot had ever been by tenants seen, where ivy clung and wapses stung, where beeses hummed and drummed and strummed, where treeses grew and breezes blew, a thatchy roof, quite waterproof, where countless herds of dicky birds built twiggy beds to lay their heads. My mother begs I'll make it eggs, but though it's true that dickies do construct a nest with chirpy noise, with view to rest their eggy joys 'neath eavy sheds, yet eggs and beds, as I explain to her in vain 500 times, are faulty rhymes. 'Neath such a cot, built on a plot of freehold land, dwelt Mary and her worthy father, named by me Gregory Parable, LL.D. He knew no guile, this simple man, no worldly wile, or plot, or plan, except that plot of freehold land that held the cot and Mary and her worthy father, named by me Gregory Parable, LL.D. A grave and learned scholar he, yet simple as a child could be. He'd shirk his meal to sit and cram a goodish deal of Eton gram. No man alive could him nonplus with vocative of Filius. No man alive more fully knew the passive of a verb or two. None better knew the worth than he of words that end in B, D, T. Upon his green in early spring he might be seen endeavouring to understand the hooks and crooks of Henry and his Latin books, or calling for his Caesar on the Gallic war, like any Don, or p'raps expounding unto all how mythic Balbus built a wall. So lived the sage, who's named by me Gregory Parable, LL.D. To him one autumn day there came a lovely youth of mystic name. He took a lodging in the house, and fell a-dodging snipe and grouse, for oh, that mild scholastic one let shooting for a single gun. By 3 or 4, when sport was o'er, the mystic one laid by his gun, and made sheep's eyes of giant size till after tea at Mary P. And Mary P., so kind was she too made eyes of giant size, whose every dart right through the heart appeared to run that mystic one. The doctor's whim engrossing him, he did not know they flirted so, for save at tea, muser musee, as I'm advised, monopolized and rendered blind his giant mind. But looking up above his cup one afternoon, he saw them spoon. "Aha," quoth he, "you naughty lass, as quaint old Ovid says, amas." The mystic youth avowed the truth, and, claiming ruth, he said, "In sooth I love your daughter, aged man. Refuse to join us if you can. Treat not my offer, sir, with scorn. I'm wealthy, though I'm lowly born." "Young sir," the aged scholar said, "I never thought you meant to wed. Engrossed completely with my books, I little noticed lovers' looks. I've lived so long away from man, I do not know of any plan by which to test a lover's worth, except, perhaps, the test of birth. I've half forgotten in this wild a father's duty to his child. It is his place, I think it's said, to see his daughters richly wed to dignitaries of the earth, if possible of noble birth. If noble birth is not at hand, a father may, I understand, and this affords a chance for you, be satisfied to wed her to a Boucicault or Baring, which means anyone who's very rich. Now, there's an earl who lives hard by. My child and I will go and try if he will make the maid his bride. If not, to you she shall be tied." They sought the earl that very day. The sage began to say his say. The earl, a very wicked man, whose face bore vice's blackest ban, cut short the scholar's simple tale, and said in voice to make them quail, "Pooh! Go along, you're drunk, no doubt. Here, Peters, turn these people out." The sage, rebuffed in mode uncouth, returning, met the mystic youth. "My darling boy," the scholar said, "take Mary, blessings on your head." The mystic boy undid his vest, and took a parchment from his breast, and said, "Now by that noble brow I ne'er knew father such as thou. The sterling rule of common sense now reaps its proper recompense. Rejoice, my soul's unequalled queen, for I am Duke of Gretna Green." End of Ballad number 12, Gregory Parable, LL.D., of More Bab Ballads by W.S. Gilbert. This recording is in the public domain.